I mean, in mammography, you're looking at structure, you're looking for something to see, like calcifications, a mass, any change in density in the breast tissue. In thermography, it's a test of physiology. You're looking for inflammation, different heat patterns on the breast. It's actually it's completely different. So, and I guess the beauty of thermography is that it can sometimes detect things earlier than a mammogram would, because inflammation is the first process of disease.
Let's ditch the quick fix and dive into today's conversation.
Welcome, everybody. My guest today is Ursula Walker. Ursula is dedicated to empowering women to take charge of their breast health by offering a safe method for breast and body screening and breast health information. Ursula resides in Issaquah, Washington, along with her large extended family. Ursula and her sister Ingrid opened a BRAS Thermography Clinic in Issaquah's charming Gilman Village in 2012. Their mother, the family matriarch, survived breast cancer a number of years ago, so helping other women with breast cancer prevention has been near and dear to her heart. Because thermography does no harm and gives valuable information to aid in preventing health problems, this was the perfect opportunity to share their passion and knowledge of natural health with the community and anyone interested in learning about this beneficial technology. Welcome, Ursula. It's just exciting to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Awesome. A brief little intro there. What have you been? You started the thermography in 2012. What were you doing before 2012? And I know that your family history kind of, created the desire to open this clinic, but what were you doing before? And maybe a little bit more of your background.
Right, absolutely. Actually, before I opened this clinic with my sister, I had the honor of staying home raising my children.
Awesome.
Prior to that, I worked for Alaska Airlines, which was a very fun job. But in the process of raising my children, I still really started to realize the benefit of the natural approach to illness and just any kind of disease. And then my mom did develop breast cancer, and that I was really unfamiliar with that whole process and what was involved. And the experience my mom went through actually was not the best. She did survive, and everything is fine now. But after watching that, and then when my children got older, my sister and I kind of met together, and we both really wanted to do something together. We started doing some research about what could we do, what business could we do together. And I fell upon thermography actually just by accident. I found it through some research, and I just fell in love with the whole concept. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. And so I found out that there was a naturopath in Kansas City that started this BRAS franchise. And we went out and visited her, and we just fell in love with it. So that's kind of what started it for us. So we both invested in it and decided to open a freestanding clinic, because what I found was thermography in itself wasn't really readily available for people, and it was more hidden. Maybe people would see it like once a month, in a clinic or something. So we really wanted to have it something that was steady and available on a weekly basis and whenever you wanted it. So that was kind of what got us started, and our interest in natural health, I guess, and a non-harmful approach to health.
How are you seeing it grow in your clinic, and just maybe in general thermography? Is it growing?
It really took off. Honestly, it was more of a struggle than I thought it would be when we opened the clinic. I think we thought that it would just be so popular and everybody would want to do it. And I think, honestly, the biggest drawback probably for people is that most people have to cash pay for it. And I understand that. And I heard someone say something the other day, which I thought was just so relevant. When you have medical insurance, or think of it as like a car, right? You have car insurance, but you still go in for regular maintenance for your car and get an oil change, and your car insurance doesn't cover that. Medical insurance isn't that different. Medical insurance is really for illness, like for a sickness insurance. It's not really for prevention and health. I mean, if that makes any sense.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So if you look at it that way, I mean, I think it has a lot of value, but I know for a lot of people that's the drawback. But anyway, so when we got started, it was kind of a slow roll. We did a lot of speaking and meeting with people. And once we started to develop some relationship with practitioners, that's really when it took off for us. And then also when Truth About Cancer came out, that series did talk about thermography, and it just kind of brought us a little bit more to the forefront, I think. So, and then since then, the pandemic hit, and that was a little bit
Bit of a hiccup there.
Yeah, for everyone, it was a hiccup, but I'm pretty much back to, I think, almost to where we were right before. So as far as the clientele, so that's a good thing. But yeah, I think going into it, I expected something different than what I ran into. And unfortunately, this was the biggest disappointment to me, because I was just like, maybe ignorant, but I thought the natural community, even like naturopaths and would really be all over this, like that would be, but it's really not the case. And I think what I've learned in this process, it's not that they're anti necessarily, but I think what I've learned in this process, that there's so much pressure for practitioners to follow the standard protocol. And if they go outside of that, I think they put themselves at risk. So because of that it isn't as pushed or as encouraged as I thought it would be. So a lot of the decisions to come in are really based on the individual, that they do their own research, they've come to their own conclusion. And as a woman, I mean, I went in to get my mammogram when I was 40, which I'm now 54, by the way. And I went in there and I walked out of there and I thought, this cannot be good. It's like, there's nothing about this that my intuition tells me that this is anything good for me. Like, it seems to be harmful. And regardless of whether it's looking for something inside my breast, the actual process seemed harmful to me. And I never went back. And that is a decision I made. And I realized that I have to make that on my own, because my doctor every year is going to tell me to go get one. But just, I guess intuitively as a woman, I don't think that's a healthy thing to do for our breasts. And
yes.
So it's interesting.
Yeah. So and I'm hopeful that more realize the benefits and act. I think a lot of women have that kind of intuition that you're sharing, where you go, this doesn't seem quite right, but they say this is great. So I think that's a good segue to just say, what's the real differences, just kind of in application between thermography and mammography? Maybe kind of hit on that a little bit. The points that are really the most substantive on the comparison.
Absolutely. And the thing with comparison is they're completely different, like totally different types of tests. I mean, in mammography, you're looking at structure, you're looking for something to see, like calcifications, a mass, any change in density in the breast tissue. In thermography, it's a test of physiology. You're looking for inflammation, different heat patterns on the breast. It's actually completely different. So, and I guess the beauty of thermography is that it can sometimes detect things earlier than a mammogram would, because inflammation is the first process of disease. So, and when a tumor is forming, it requires a blood supply, and that really is visible in thermography. But that said, thermography is not 100%, and neither is mammography. In fact, the sensitivity is about the same. They're about 83, 84%, both of them. But they're very, very different. And so the comparison is hard, because I actually, for me personally, thermography, I do it annually, but I actually get ultrasounds also every now and then, because we're not looking inside the breast with thermography. We're just looking at the heat patterns. There is some situations where the tumor is really encapsulated and it doesn't have the inflammatory properties that you normally would see, that it can be missed. So, and if you tend to be a person like me that tends to be a little bit cystic, you get lumps and bumps and you're like, okay, the thermogram shows me I'm fine, but I just want them evaluated every now and then. So it was approved in 1982. It was FDA cleared as an adjunctive screening for mammography, they said specifically. But I like to say for another structural test, like it's a good adjunctive screening. I think if you do both of those together, you get up to a 95% accuracy rate if you do both of them.
When you do both the ultrasound and
Yes.
the mammography,
Yes.
you get a higher rate and nowhere near the invasiveness.
Nowhere near it. And with mammography, you're getting radiation, but not only is it radiation, it's slower because they're looking at soft tissue. So the amount of radiation, the type of radiation you're exposed to actually is much more harmful to your cells and to your DNA. So if you are at high risk for breast cancer, you're actually increasing that risk by exposing yourself to radiation from the mammogram, not to mention the compression you're getting, which can be up to 45 pounds, I think I read.
Right,
They
right.
did that. I'm certain they did that to me because it was so bad. I'm very small. So the amount they had to pull skin and, what they had to do to get to see anything was so violent. It felt like it was violent. And so that in itself isn't good though. You're down. If you did have something in there that was a problem, it could damage it or spread it, I think. I mean, I don't know if you've done any studies on that, but it doesn't seem right. It seems like trauma to your breasts. And
a couple of things there, the trauma itself, but what you've touched on, I know, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, but when we consider just the radiation part of what you're sharing, they call it a scatter radiation, but ultimately absorbs into the breast tissue. And that can lead to cancer years later down the road, just because it absorbs so much into the breast itself. And then the other thing is, I think I've seen some study on this that typically, and again, you probably know this better than I, but typically the mass from cancer really doesn't show up for 5 to 7 years on a mammogram. Whereas, like you said, you're not 100% with the thermography, but you're at 83%, and at 83%, you're picking up that inflammatory situation well before 5 to 7 years, so that you can send that off to an oncologist and say, hey, I think we should take a look at this, right? Is that kind of?
It's exactly right. And also, if you're getting really the strength of thermography too is changes over time. I mean, that's one of its strengths and that's why it's really, if you're doing thermography, it's good to get it done, some people choose to do it biannually, which is totally fine, or annually, but just to get repeated ones done, because once the first year you come in, the doctors want you to establish a baseline just to get that kind of idea of what your thermal fingerprint is, what is your normal. And so they want you to get the first screening and then the second one 3 to 5 months after that. And with those two, they compare. If there's no change, that is your baseline. If there's change over time, that is suspicious because it shouldn't. It should remain the same.
Should stay towards that baseline.
Yes, and that's really the strength. And if you over year, if you're getting a some risk category and they can't find anything with a structural image, it doesn't mean that there's nothing there. And so you should take that into account. And there's so much we can do lifestyle wise. I mean, there's so much we can do just to reverse that, actually. I mean, our body creates the cancer, but it can also eliminate it. It really has that power.
Manage it.
We just need to know what to do.
Right.
And I don't know, I mean, there's just so much information coming out. I feel like it's kind of an explosion of information, but I've just been reading a few things lately about how the role of mitochondria has on the development of cancer. And the mitochondria it's a very interesting information coming out. It's just about how we can support our mitochondria actually helps us prevent getting cancer or reverse it even.
Right.
It's very, very interesting.
It is. And I want to circle back to that kind of idea of how do we take better care of our bodies. But before we get there, I'm going to come back just a little bit to the breast density.
Yeah, absolutely.
A little bit on the density. Yeah, you touched on that a little bit. It turns out that, my knowledge is pretty limited, but I thought that, the significant density issues were limited. But it sounds like from my research for just coming into this interview, it's like 90% of women have some type of a density component. And what's kind of share a little bit about breast density and how that impacts, some of the testing and just in general, how it impacts breast health.
Well, I actually think that it is wrong for women with really dense breasts to really even be put through the mammography screening, because it totally limits the viewing. It's like snowy. And they usually have to come back and they want a diagnostic. And then it's just more and more radiation when it's really not the best test for someone with dense breast. It just isn't. I know there's different degrees of density, but what happens with density is it reduces the effectiveness of mammography. So you can say, okay, mammography is 84% sensitive, but when you have dense breasts, it can go down, way down, 60, 40, whatever. And I don't think women really understand that. They just think, oh yeah, I have dense breasts. But to me personally, if that were me, I'd think, if I have dense breasts, what am I doing mammography for, right? I think maybe we should think of a different screening, because it's just not effective. With thermography, doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how dense you are. And in fact, another really great breast implants. Like if you have breast implants, thermography is wonderful. It's really wonderful. It doesn't affect it, and it gives you a good view. Another thing about thermography that is really another thing to mention is that mammography, you're basically sticking a certain, whatever they can get in those two plates is what they're screening. With mammography, we're screening the brachial plexus area, the axilla, everything. We
Such a
get
good point.
underneath the breast. We're seeing much more than the mammogram is, as far as the screening window is. So
Right. I
that's
think
another real big benefit. But yeah, dense breast tissue, and they, there's been studies saying that, okay, if you have dense breast, you have higher risk of developing cancer, but is that really, I haven't looked into that too deep, but I was wondering if that's partly because they can't see very well in the mammogram. So I don't know. I don't know why density would make you more prone to cancer or not. And like I said, I haven't run into that too much, but it does make mammography less effective for sure. And I have also read that a lot of, like 50% of cancers are caught by just women clinically doing a self-breast exam.
Self-breast exam.
Yeah.
Right.
And that was the case with my mother too. She had gone in for a mammogram, didn't see anything. She found the lump herself later, and then went in and said,
Had it evaluated. Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, that it's such an important thing to know. There's only a certain amount of tissue being evaluated in a mammogram, and that tissue is being, brutalized to get through it. And like you said, the thermography, I'm familiar with what you do and what the report shows. It shows the entire upper body. For example, if you do an upper body scan, it shows the axilla area, the chest area below into the upper abdominal area. So you get like you said, you get this really good view of what's going on, any inflammatory process going on. Right. And I don't know when it was, but the Swiss have basically stopped mammograms in their country, in Switzerland. And basically, I think it was a Lancet report in 2000 was a reference article that I saw that said, hey, we just don't think it should be used in breast cancer screening.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things. I think, we're kind of behind. And I think a lot of that has to do with our default systematic approach to health in our country, right?
Right.
You get thrown into this process and it's pharma driven, medical equipment driven, So anyway, I'm kind of rambling down a little editorial.
No, but it's true. I mean, that's what we're given for prevention. I mean, that's what they're saying. Prevent breast cancer, get your mammogram. That's the answer to prevention in the public. That's what they're hearing. So yeah.
And like you said, it does miss, mammograms do miss I guess the one stat that I saw was that 10% of the women really do have the significantly dense breast tissue. And that in that situation, like you just said, mammogram will miss up to 50% of those.
Oh, yeah.
And then they have, some hangups with mammogram and, just the combination of using, testing combinations. You kind of have to run through the insurance and all that too.
Well, and that's what's really frustrating, because I tell my clients, I said, if they're coming in just for thermography, I said, it really is a good idea to get an ultrasound every now and then and to check your breasts out that way. But the hoops they have to jump through to try to get that to happen is almost impossible. I mean, because the way the insurance companies are driven, you have to get the mammogram before you get the ultrasound in order for it to be covered.
Right.
Okay. So then then my clients say, okay, then I'll cash pay, but the doctors won't even write it that way for them.
Right.
And so it's really, and I understand the struggle, and it's very frustrating. It's very frustrating as a woman that you cannot choose what you think is best for you based on the information you have. And I know that a lot of it comes back to the fact that our country has this terrible lawsuit system, which I think makes a lot of doctors afraid. we have to follow the rules so we don't get ourselves into a point where we can be liable for anything. And
Right.
I do understand that. And I'm not trying to criticize, because I know that a lot of what's happening is being like, people are being kind of squeezed, you know what I mean? And told not that they can't think outside of this, or else they're putting themselves into this danger themselves. And so I do understand, but I do wish it was easier for women in this realm to just kind of make those decisions, and especially if we're willing to pay it ourselves. It just, that should be an okay thing to do.
Yeah, I agree. And like I said, and that's just it, all of the complications of trying to have combination tests and the hoops that you have to jump through with the insurance, whether it's thermography,
Yeah.
which they're not covering, mammogram and ultrasound. The breast implant illness, do you see much of that that's one of the concerns that are out there, because of, the breast implants have, really been much more prominently utilized over the last 2-3 decades.
Right.
Are you seeing in your world more inflammatory reactions? Do you pick up any problems with breast implants when you're
No,
doing thermography?
I haven't personally come across that too much. I mean, I have a lot of women with implants for sure. I'm sometimes very surprised at how many years some of the women have had those implants in. Um, but I personally haven't come across any of that, any inflammatory processes with implants that I can speak on.
That you're picking up?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
And the reason I ask is I know there's breast implant illness, and it has to
There
do with
is, yeah.
something with a toxic material that gets leached into the body. And you go back to the mitochondrial conversation and how it impacts things at the cellular level, how it impacts the immune system. And so I was just curious if you were seeing any inflammation around it, which is not necessarily surprising that you're not, but I was just kind of curious.
Yeah.
How about the concept of breast cancer has got a high percentage of heredity, genetic reality.
I've really like Shane. I mean, I've been reading so much about that, and it's only like 5 to 10% really that's genetic. And what really has been profound to me, and even in my personal life, like I just feel like there's so much more connection with cancer, even in your emotional health.
Well-being.
Yeah, and I don't think I know that there's a lot we can do. Like, I mean, you can make yourself crazy actually, like focusing on making sure you're eating exactly right and doing all this other kind of stuff, and that actually can cause anxiety in itself. But the chronic stress, or the high stress kind of like daily life stress kind of people, are actually much more prone to get cancer than people that are more emotional healthy. And I don't know. I wanted to cover this because I love this. There's like 7 basic traits for cancer patients, and I was floored when I read this myself. And one of them was being highly conscientious, caring, dutiful, responsible, and hardworking. Okay, that's a great quality, right?
Yes.
But it's a stressful quality. Number 2 was being someone who is worried for others and carries people's burdens. And then number 3 was being a people pleaser with a great need for approval. And all these attributes are good, but they cause you internal stress is the problem. And then number 4 was having a poor relationship with either both parents and usually your spouse. And then 5 was internalizing toxic emotions like anger and resentment, and having a great difficulty of expressing those emotions, which is obvious that you would just internalize all your emotions, right? And an inability to cope with stress is number 6. And then number 7 is having unresolved, deep-seated emotional problems and conflicts of childhood. And I'm like, and being unaware of them. But I think, I mean, I know as a woman, this has been a new experience for me because I'm 54. I'm just kind of like starting to go through the menopause experience and everything. And I actually was shocked at what this experience is like, because I feel like it's like a moment in a woman's life where everything is like all of a sudden standing in front of you and you're staring at it. And I don't know why that is.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's
Huge.
because of the hormone changes. I don't know if it's because typically this is a time where the kids are like getting married and, having their own lives. I don't know what it is. I really don't know. But it's just made me so much more aware of the effect of your your emotions and your how important that is. And everybody's got to have their own journey into that kind of healing. I mean, I think it's a spiritual journey for everyone, regardless of what people choose to be their spiritual journey. It is a spiritual journey. But I think that to me is probably number one for health. Because I think without that, you can't, like, if you are in a high stress mode and you're eating super healthy food, I don't even think your body can use it properly.
Right, right. It's so huge. I totally agree. That's one of the questions that I was going to say. What are some of the risk factors? And we know a lot of them are environment. We know a lot of them are the food.
Yes.
We know a lot of different things that are, but the stress component and how you deal, and that is an interesting list. All these good quality characteristics. But again, I think it is one of those. How do you manage those things? How many times have somebody come into my office after they just lost a loved one that they've been the caretaker for, and now their body is, reacting to that stress or a stressful personal situation in relationships or things of that nature. And it's so hard on your immune system. You get way too much cortisol going on in your body. Your body is in this parasympathetic state instead of or it's in the sympathetic state rather than the parasympathetic state, way too much. So there's just a total imbalance. So that's a great list. I'm glad that you shared that. And it kind of debunks the, the genetic kind of connection. It's true that, you can have some genetic dispositions, but not to the level that most people feel. And it kind of, I wanted to ask you this too. I'm not sure if you've looked into this part, but some women went out and done, double mastectomies because of their genetic concern. And I just feel like that is just not a great approach.
It's not a great approach. And even surgery in itself causes the body so much stress. So even that could increase your risk of cancer. I mean, you got to think of that, it's a stressful endeavor to go through a major surgery like that, I think. Definitely. What interesting, going a little bit back to the stress thing, is that I had an experience with someone I knew that was in a high state of stress, like high state of stress, gone through a lot of trauma, felt like they were just like surviving for years, did a full body thermogram on them, just lots of inflammatory results, lots of things came up. A year later, life changed. They calmed down a lot, they'd really worked on their emotions, and just their stress level was much lower. So much change. And typically, yes, it's typically on thermography. If I do like a half body on someone or a full body, and we do an annual one, there's not a lot of change most of the time. It's most of the time about the same, maybe a little bit here and there, but this was drastic. And that really, really showed me that how much our stress level can affect our body function, like in a visual way in thermography, like you can see.
It was a very good change.
Yes, it was a very good
what you
change.
thought. Yeah. So that's one of the things that, it sounds like people really need to focus on, which is what is a huge thing for all health, is trying to, how do you manage stress, and it's not an easy game, but spirituality is definitely, I think, the biggest factor in my life for that.
Yeah,
and so what are some of the other things, and you were starting to touch on it a little bit earlier, on what people can do and what you recommend people do to have better breast health, better just general health. I think better general health leads to better specific.
Absolutely. Yeah, we every time a client comes in for their first screening, we always go through some information about that, and we cover things like vitamin D. That's just such a basic immune system supporter. And a lot of people, there's more doctors testing for it than they used to be, but it's a good idea to get a test every year, because people are different about how much they need to have the right levels. And in the medical world, I think the range is fairly low for your vitamin D level, but I keep mine fairly high, like around 80. Okay. And I know that some people have it lower than that, and it's still in the normal range, but that's what I choose to do. I choose to keep mine a little bit high. Iodine too is something that we don't eat a lot in our standard American diet. It's something that all of our cells need. Our breasts need it especially. And so you can, iodine drops, there's actually a test you can do where you buy iodine tincture in the drugstore, and you kind of paint it on your inner thigh or your stomach, and you can see how fast it dissipates, because the faster it dissipates, the more depleted you are. So
interesting.
Yeah, if
I'm
it
not
stays
familiar with that.
on, if it stays on for like, it says, if it's gone in 2 hours, you're extremely deficient. But if it stays on after more than 24 hours, you're usually pretty good. So it's
Okay.
kind of a good indicator of where you are. The only thing I say about iodine is that I mean, you can take, there's some kelp supplements you can take, which have iodine in it. There's Lugol's iodine, which you can use drops. But the only thing about iodine is your thyroid's very sensitive to iodine. And there's some people that do have reactions to iodine. So I'm always like really careful about that. I'm not a practitioner. You should always discuss this with your practitioner because everybody's thyroid is a little bit different and people have different issues with their thyroid. So, but iodine is really important though. It is an important part. And so vitamin D and iodine is, I always talk about that. I always talk about our dental health. And a lot of people don't realize that our teeth are actually directly connected. Some of
Yeah.
them directly connected to our breast. One thing about thermography is great. We do dental and they can see sometimes if there's inflammation, they can see if it's actually draining. And that's really really good information for people. But even just on a regular basis, doing something for your teeth that's antibacterial, because a lot of those standard toothpaste out there aren't. Using xylitol products, any kind of food grade hydrogen peroxide rinses, salt water is actually great for your teeth. Also, oils, coconut oil, olive oil, sesame oil, they're all antibacterial. So you can just swish those in your
Oil
mouth.
pulling.
Yeah, that's all really good for your dental health. But dental health is hugely important. That bacteria in your mouth really, really matters. I mean, and I always say this, and I know I don't mean to degrade anything, but if you have an animal, if you have a dog, they always tell you to get their teeth cleaned. And because if you don't, they end up with a whole bunch of internal issues. We are no different.
Right.
No different. And I really try to encourage people, if they don't already have a root canal, which a lot of people do, try to avoid them because root canals tend to be problematic. They seal it off, and sometimes they seal off the bacteria in there. So it ends up becoming just a festering infection that you don't even know about that's actually causing harm to, and it could affect your breast too. So, and they've done some studies on the relation between root canal and breast cancer, and it's pretty compelling, actually.
It's very compelling, and there's some really good biological dentists out there that are aware of that and aware of the connection, and yeah, it's huge. I'm glad you're bringing that to light because the connection between oral health and breast cancer is huge.
It's really huge. And then I also touch on thyroid. I think everybody should get their thyroid checked, and usually naturopaths do a pretty good job of doing a full panel. Because you can just get the TSH check, but that's not really a full picture of your thyroid. So I always encourage women, especially, to just make sure the thyroid's getting checked every now and then, because that does affect our breast health also.
Yeah.
It's really, really important. And I also touch on bras because I know women, we have to, I mean, it's nice to be able to wear bras during the day. For some of us, we need to. If you don't have to, it's better not to. And we're all different shapes and sizes. So I totally respect that. And I realize that. So I tell women, if they need to wear a bra, please wear one that's not super tight. Try to avoid underwires. I know when you get fitted in a store, they're always going to like make them like armor, and they make them as tight as possible. But really, that's actually not the best for us.
Not good.
No, you're restricting lymph flow, you're
Right.
restricting movement, and the wires, a lot of them are actually wire. And now that we live in this kind of world that's wireless everywhere, you're attracting EMFs to your breast that way. So just keep wires out of your bra. It's just not a good idea. And not to mention the extra compression it causes. And they did a study actually in a book. There was a book called Dress to Kill, where if you wore your bras 24 hours a day, like increased your risk of cancer to 3 out of 4.
Wow.
And if you wear it less than 12, it goes all the way down to 1 out of 152. So I always tell women less than 12, just take your bra off at home, just do whatever you can just to kind of not have too much pressure on your breast. And then I cover also foods. Of course, we know, I mean, that kind of, I can lump that in with the microbiome too. We know that sugar is not good for us. Everybody knows that. I mean, it's not like you don't need to tell anyone that necessarily, but it's just in everything in the US. I feel like it's in everything.
Huge.
So we've got to try to either reduce it at least, or eliminate it if we can. But I know, I mean, I'm not 100% eliminating it either, because it's just in things and I can't do that. But I try my best to reduce it as much as I can, and try not to eat even like really sugary fruits. I don't get involved with that. I have some berries, which I think are good for us, but I'm really careful on even fruits now. I don't.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I know juicing is a big thing for some people, but it causes me to have blood sugar issues juicing. So I don't do that either, unless I'm doing just greens. And it's
And
just,
not as much of the sugar. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's just interesting. I know we're all different too, and how we kind of metabolize those kind of things. So, but you know, the foods I talk about are things that are kind of relate back to things that we need, like kelp is a source of iodine, asparagus is a source of selenium. Selenium is actually a proven mineral, an anti-cancer mineral. So, and I always tell people that, you know, you can eat asparagus and Brazil nuts to get selenium, but how much selenium do they really have? We don't know. So I just choose to take a supplement of selenium that I make sure I'm getting enough, because it's a very important mineral for cancer prevention. Talk about, you know, green tea, it's an excellent product. Also pomegranates is good too, but apple cider vinegar is a good product too. The Bragg's, I mean, I don't use it every day, but I definitely incorporate that into my regimen too. Bone broths are good. Honestly, I can't use bone broths, but I don't want to say they're not good, because they are good, but there's just a little too much histamine in them for me. We talk about avoiding aspartame, like NutraSweet, any kind of
So
artificial
important.
sugars. Yeah, stevia is probably the only one that I would say is okay, but the rest of them, they're just not good. I think we should avoid them entirely. They're chemicals. And deodorant, natural deodorants, if you're going to use a deodorant, use a natural one, because we're putting them right by our breasts. I mean, our skin is an organ anyway, so everything we put on our skin is an issue. Like, and for
Yes.
women especially, we have cosmetics and all sorts of stuff. So we really got to be careful, because before we know it, we're just slathering ourselves with a bunch of toxins and we don't even realize it.
And your body just absorbs it right in. It has a
Absorbs
negative
it.
impact. It's just like eating it. Yeah, a good point. All of those are really good points. And I was going to ask about deodorants as well. I know personally, I use a Thai stick or Thai stone, which is very natural, and I've been using that for 20 years. And which, how many men do you actually screen? And how often are they having problems? You know, as we talked just a little bit about some of these issues, how to take better care of yourself. It's more common with women as far as a lot of the different deodorants and makeup and cosmetics and things of that nature. But how about men as far as breast and upper body screening?
You know, I think men are, it's very interesting when I screen men, and I do it. It's not as frequent as women, obviously. But what I find with men is the most fascinating is that I think there's always a lot that they're not aware of. Like, I feel like women are more aware, and men just aren't. I don't know. And I don't know
They don't
why.
got it.
Yeah. And so a lot of times their wives will encourage them to come in, and that's usually the case. And then they'll come in, and I feel like the reports are really informative and really great for them, because it's like they're just not like super in touch with how they're feeling all the time or what might be an issue. So I
Right.
think it's a great screening for men. It just it sheds light on things that they wouldn't have thought of. It's just and
Right.
I've had, you know, I mean, I'd say the most common is the half body, but I've done full bodies on men too. And I think it's just a great window, just kind of like an overall check, you know, just kind of give you a heads up that there's might be some things that you might want to be aware of, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's kind of transitioning from how do you take care of yourself into, yeah, you do half bodies, upper bodies are very common, but the full body screens, what are some of the types of cancers outside of breast cancer and or other health issues that you actually pick up on thermography? So if you do a full body screen for a man or a woman, what are some of the different things you're looking at the different areas?
Right. Well, for full body screenings, but for one thing, this isn't a diagnostic screening. I want to make that clear. For breast or body, it's never diagnostic. It's just giving you it's signs of inflammation, and they'll say this area needs further investigation, basically. But for a full body, the most common things we see are probably dental issues, TMJ, sinus, sometimes thyroid will come up, carotid, sometimes carotid inflammation. I mean, we have a carotid artery that goes down the neck. If they're equally warm, it's usually not a concern, but if they have one that tends to be warm and the other one isn't, then they might say, okay, maybe an ultrasound of that carotid may be warranted, because there can be a blockage there. Cardiac dysfunction comes up as a cold cold over the left side. And that sometimes is a
Okay.
concern that your heart's maybe not functioning as good as it should be. Pulmonary dysfunction can come up sometimes too. So it's lung.
Okay.
Also, early diabetes, a lot of times that shows up in the hands. If the
Okay.
hands are, if the hands kind of look like they have a glove on of heat, that
Yeah.
a lot of times is a sign of early diabetes before people even know they're headed there. So that's a really good indicator.
Yeah. Hand and glove distribution, picking it up early.
Yeah, absolutely. And the torso is pretty informative. Like they can see liver, gallbladder inflammation. They can see digestively, they can pretty specifically kind of pinpoint where digestively there's some issues going on, where there's ascending, descending, it's
Okay.
pretty interesting. The uterine ovary area, they sometimes can pick inflammation in those areas also. It's non-specific. They just say there's some genitourinary inflammation there that might warrant some further investigation. Adrenal issues sometimes show up also on thermography,
Okay.
which is really interesting. And also, of course, the typical arthritic inflammation, knee issues,
Okay.
plantar fasciitis, varicose veins, any kind of vascular issues shows up really clearly on thermography too. So it's just, I don't know, it's a good overall check, you
Good
can,
screen.
yeah.
How about prostate? Does prostate inflammation show
No,
up? Doesn't
no, it
typically show
doesn't.
up.
A
Okay.
little bit too tucked in there. I mean, even like with the ovaries, I always say that too. It's like it can sometimes pick up something, but I wouldn't count on it as being the reliable screening because our ovaries are so protected, and prostate, even where it's located, it's not a good screening tool for it at all.
Gotcha.
Yeah, unfortunately. And brain also, doesn't see anything in the brain. I mean, people want to, it's a head to toe check, but it's the face. It's like the
Sinuses
skin,
and
the
yeah.
head, the forehead, because the hair too, underneath the hair, you can't see a thing. And the brain is super protected in the skull. So because this is really just imaging your skin. So
Okay.
it's working off the sympathetic nerve response also.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. And like you said, ultimately it's not diagnostic, but
No,
it's definitely a good early detection that you can follow up with the oncologist,
absolutely.
medical doctor, that type of thing, and or go, like you said, follow up with an ultrasound. That's the great combination is,
Yeah.
thermography and ultrasound together.
Yeah.
Boy, there's so much more that, it'd be fun to kind of jump into. We're kind of running through our time window here. Any other things that we haven't covered that you'd kind of like to touch on?
Yeah, I do want to touch on the fact that each of our thermograms, when they're done, they're sent in through when I'm the clinical thermographer. So I send those in through a secure server for a medical doctor to interpret. So they are fully interpreted by a medical doctor that take extra specialized training in thermology to interpret these images. So we have a great team of doctors, and the turnaround time is really pretty quick. If I submit them, a full body can take 3 to 4 days. A breast usually is 1 to 2. It's pretty quick.
Mm-hmm.
And so everything's fully interpreted, so you can read it. The doctor that you're giving it to can read it. A lot of times, because doctors aren't super familiar with thermography because it's not in the gold standard, I tell women or men, if they have issues on their interpretation, highlight what they want them to read, because if you give them the report, a lot of times they won't even spend the time to look through all the pages, because there's also, when you get your breast screening done, you'll get a risk rating, and it starts out at normal limits, and then low risk, some risk, increased risk. It has a glossary, in the report, so that you understand what those risk ratings mean.
Mm-hmm.
And when the doctors see there's so many pages and so many things to read, a lot of times they're like, I don't understand this, right? So I always like to tell people to point out what they want addressed in the thermogram. And they have the privilege as a doctor, any doctor has a privilege of contacting the interpreting doctor for any questions. So
Mm-hmm.
that privilege is given. So that is a great thing also.
Awesome. So, what are just a couple of take-home points? We've covered a couple things, as far as what would you say in a wrap-up, comparing thermography, mammography, what are a couple just real kind of take-home points that you'd like people to just really kind of have as we wrap up?
Right. Thermography is such a great screening tool. It's not 100% like so many other screenings aren't, but it's also wonderful because it can be done really at any age. I mean, for women, I would probably not recommend you start until you're after 25, because there's just so many changes happening hormonally up until that point.
Mm-hmm.
If you're pregnant or nursing, thermography isn't it's not harmful, and you could do it, but we don't do them because there's so much vascular change and things going on with your breast that it would just not be a good reading. They wouldn't be able to tell what your baseline is or anything. So there's 3-month waiting period after any kind of surgery, any kind of breastfeeding, anything like that. There's 3-month waiting period. But it's such a non-invasive test. There's no harm to the body. You can do it as many times as you want, and it's never going to hurt you, which is, I think, a big bonus of thermography.
Huge.
It's also going to give you an earlier indication of something that may be going wrong than you would get on a structural image. Doesn't mean it can't miss something. So I just want to make that clear, because I'm not saying that this is a replacement. It has been approved as an adjunctive screening, not as a standalone. But and the other, I guess the other take home would be the one other thing is, because thermography is not regulated, I do think you need to pay attention a little bit. I'm not going to say this one's better than that one, but you should really ask questions about how much I don't know how to get the questions right, but there's some thermography equipment out there that's very inexpensive, and the thermogram's only as good as the thermographer and the interpretation software and the interpreter, right? It's like you have to pay attention to all those things. And there's some equipment that you can spend $2,000 on, and some that you can spend $25,000 on, but it's the software behind it, it's the technician, it's the training, it's everything behind it. You just kind of got to be a little bit careful. But I always say to everyone, it's like, I think thermography is an excellent screening. So please, by any means, go where you can find someone that's going to do it. I just say that you just got to be a little bit careful about the just doing a little bit of research, I guess. Maybe read some reviews or ask some questions. And I don't want to get in a babble. Another thing that people get in a babble with is grayscale and color and how specific and all this kind of stuff. And it's like, we're in the digital era now, so we're all pretty on par.
Gotcha.
It's really the interpretation and the doctor that's interpreting that matters probably the most, and the software they're using, to be honest.
Well, and I'm familiar with your work, and we really appreciate it. And I was gonna say, you're connected to a national organization.
Yes.
I think, how long has BRAS Thermography been in business?
We've been in business now for 10 years.
Okay.
Yeah, we've been in business for 10 years, and we're associated with American College of Clinical Thermography, and their website is thermologyonline.org.
Okay.
And they can connect you with if you can look for clinic locations through their service. The great thing about using us is that if you do come here and you tend to move, there's people everywhere across the country and outside of this country that have the same camera system. And as long as you use that same camera, your previous image will be compared. So you don't have to start over.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And I think that's the real awesome part of it. It's just like, there's a good network of people and doctors with this.
Yeah, and that's really, really, really good. I mean, that's such a positive aspect. So how about following up with you specifically, and where you're at, and how you see patients, and what somebody might expect, with following up with you?
Yeah, I'm located in Issaquah. We do have a clinic here. I'm here Tuesday through Friday from 9:30 to 4:30. Typically, there's some alterations to that sometimes, but that's typically my hours. I do by appointment only now, though. I used to just be here all the time, but now I'm by appointment. A typical experience for you, if you made an appointment, would be you'd come in, and there's some intake forms I send you via email. You come in, I bring you to a room. It's a comfortable room at 70 degrees, and then you need to undress from the waist up if we're doing breast exam. And there's a nice little scarf that we use as a gown just for the acclimation period. There's about 10 minutes of acclimation time that you need for your body to adjust to the room. And then I go through your history with you. And then once I get started, it takes maybe 5 minutes to take those 7 images. And then I have you get dressed, and I go through a nice booklet just about some breast health information. And then you're on your way. It's really pretty simple. It's
Awesome.
about a 30 to 45 minute, it depends how chatty we are. Sometimes it can be an hour, but
That's great.
but it can be as quick as you need it to be.
That's great. Hey, well, I really appreciate you joining us today, and I hope people follow up with you. Thermography is safe. It's an early detective method. and I just want to emphasize safe. There's no known harmful effects, and that's a really positive thing. There are harmful effects with mammography. It's kind of slow to detect, the tumors, things of that nature. So I know that people have to make their own decision. I just hope people have this opportunity to get more knowledge, and you've given a lot of good knowledge today for people to, make some decisions for their own health and be their own health advocates. So thank you again for joining us today, Ursula, and I hope maybe we can do this again in the future and follow up.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, everybody, have a great day.